his chickens, but in the barn he found a woman sleeping on the hay with 2 twin girls and a chicken. He didn't call the police. He did something else. Don't forget to subscribe and write where you're watching this video from. The morning sun had just begun to stretch its golden fingers across the faded fields when Isaac Banks stepped out onto his porch, a chipped ceramic mug of black coffee warming his large, calloused hands. The air held that faint smell of dew on dry earth, a promise of heat later, but for now it was still and cool. He took a sip, feeling the bitter bite of the brew settle into his chest, and let his eyes travel across the familiar landscape, acres of stubborn soil, a rusting tractor by the tool shed, and in the distance the leaning silhouette of the old barn. Isaac was a man carved out of routine. At 42, he'd long since settled into the rhythm of the land. Wake before dawn, feed the animals, check the fencing, patch what needed fixing, and end the day with a quiet dinner and a book he rarely finished. After losing his wife 5 years earlier, he hadn't had much use for conversation. The ranch had become both sanctuary and sentence, a place where he could bury grief beneath layers of hard work and silence. He moved down the steps with a practiced slowness, his boots crunching over brittle grass and packed dirt. The barn came into view, its wide doors slightly ajar. Odd, he thought. He was sure he'd latched them last night. He paused, squinting against the sunlight, then set his mug down on the nearest fence post and approached. As he neared the barn, something inside shifted, a sound barely more than a whisper. Isaac's hand instinctively moved to the multi-tool clipped to his belt. Probably a raccoon, or maybe that fox that had been sniffing around the coop. But the movement had been too fluid, too human. He stepped into the barn, his boots muffled on the layer of old straw. The familiar scent of leather, hay, and animals greeted him like an old friend. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dimness inside, filtering through the cracks in the walls and gaps in the roof. At first, he saw nothing. Then he spotted it. A huddled shape toward the far corner, half hidden behind an overturned feed bin. A woman, young or perhaps worn by more than years. Her body curled protectively around 2 small figures, children, a boy and a girl, both blonde, maybe 4 or 5. The girl lay still, thumb in mouth, her tangled hair fanned out like corn silk across a blanket. The boy twitched in his sleep, pressing closer to the woman's side. A worn jacket covered them all, too big to belong to the children, too thin to offer much warmth. A chicken, of all things, nestled against the woman's chest, feathers rising and falling in slow rhythm. Isaac blinked. The woman stirred, sensing his presence. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking up at the wooden beams above, then fixing sharply on him. She sat up, careful not to jostle the children, her body taut with the kind of tension born of too many nights in unfamiliar places. He didn't speak. Neither did she. The chicken gave a soft cluck but didn't move. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them, thick and watchful. Then Isaac cleared his throat, tipped his hat slightly. "You always sleep with livestock?" he asked dryly, though his voice held no real edge. She stood quickly, shielding the children behind her, one hand resting on the boy's chest as if ready to snatch him up and flee. Her lips moved, and for a second no sound came out. Then she said, "We didn't mean to trespass. I thought this place was abandoned." "It's not," Isaac said, "but I'm not in the habit of tossing people out before breakfast." She didn't smile. He didn't expect her to. The boy woke then, rubbing his eyes with chubby fists, and the girl sat up groggily, leaning into her mother's side. Isaac noted how thin they all looked, especially the woman. Not starving exactly, but close. Her hands were cracked, her face pale and tired in a way that said she hadn't rested properly in weeks. He motioned to the chicken. "She yours?" The woman glanced down. "She found us." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "She leave?" "I think the kids named her Goldie," she said. There was a trace of amusement in her voice, faint but real. He looked at the chicken. It stared back, entirely unimpressed. He took a long sip from his coffee, now lukewarm. "She better not snore." The woman blinked. "What?" "Stay," he said simply, turning toward the tack room. "If the chicken doesn't snore, I suppose she can stay. You too. For now." He didn't wait for a reply. He wasn't a man who made big gestures. He simply opened the door to the feed room and began his morning tasks. If she wanted to leave, she would. If not, well, the barn had weathered worse than company. Within the hour, he heard soft voices behind him. The children's laughter, thin but genuine, echoed faintly. When he stepped out again, he saw the boy chasing a ball of twine across the aisle, the girl watching from her blanket. The woman, still nameless, stood near the door, awkward, uncertain. She didn't approach, but she didn't flee either. Without a word, Isaac fetched a broom from the wall and offered it to her. "Not much of a welcome gift," he said, "but the place needs sweeping." She took it without hesitation. They worked in silence, each keeping a cautious distance. Dust rose in shafts of sunlight as she moved through the straw, sweeping years of neglect into piles. The children played. Goldie followed them like a feathered guardian, clucking when they got too far from the woman's line of sight. Isaac noticed how the woman flinched at sudden noises, how her eyes darted toward exits. She worked like someone who expected the floor to fall out from under her at any moment. When the barn was clean, he brought out a slice of cornbread and a jar of milk from the house. He didn't ask if she was hungry. He just handed them over. She took both with a quiet nod. The girl, Millie, the boy had called her Millie, soon curled up on an old saddle blanket, fast asleep. Jesse, the boy, stacked empty feed buckets into a crooked tower. Isaac watched the woman as she watched her children. Something about the way her body softened in those moments struck him. She held her breath, always half expecting the world to snatch them away. "They yours?" he asked finally, not looking directly at her. "They're mine to protect," she said quietly. He didn't push. That evening, when the sky had turned lavender and the fields whispered with crickets, the woman came to him as he coiled the garden hose. She stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around her midsection. "We'll stay in the barn," she said. "I don't want to be in anyone's way." "You're not," he replied, "but suit yourself. Couch is warmer than hay. Hay feels honest." He didn't argue. He left the barn light on and a folded blanket on the porch, just in case. At midnight, soft footsteps crossed the wooden boards. Isaac opened the door to find her barefoot, one child in each arm. The chicken trailed behind, silent but expectant. "I changed my mind," she whispered. He stepped aside. "They snore?" he asked. She smiled, faint, worn, but real. "Only when they feel safe." "Then welcome home, for now." The next morning, long before the children stirred, Isaac found her in the kitchen, barefoot, rinsing dishes from a solitary breakfast. Goldie pecked idly at the corner rug, already making herself at home. "You didn't have to do that," he said. The woman glanced back at him. "Habit." He poured his coffee and leaned against the doorframe. "You always fix places that aren't yours?" She turned off the tap and wiped her hands on her dress. "Only when they let me stay." He didn't say anything, but he watched her, how she moved, how she always kept one ear turned toward the hallway, toward her children. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Jessie helped him water the small vegetable garden, splashing more than necessary but clearly delighted. Millie sat beside him as he mended a leather strap, her wide eyes calm and curious. Goldie perched nearby, ever vigilant. When May, as she finally introduced herself, asked to help mend the old chicken wire by the coop, Isaac handed her gloves and wire cutters without a word. She didn't need permission, only tools. By evening, the barn door creaked less, the kitchen floor had been swept, and the children slept wrapped together on the porch swing. May stood at the edge of the porch, looking out over the fields like someone trying to memorize a landscape she might never see again. Isaac handed her a cup of tea. She took it carefully, fingers brushing his for the briefest second. "You plan to stay long?" he asked. "I didn't plan anything." "Most people show up here looking for something," he said, "or hiding from something." May stared at the horizon. "Does it matter which I am?" He studied her profile, the way her shoulders hunched slightly even at rest. "Not if the chicken still doesn't snore." May blinked, then laughed, an unexpected sound, soft and unguarded. Goldie fluffed her feathers and settled deeper into the swing's shadow. "She's the only one with no trauma," May said. "She seems smug about it." "Thank you," May said, turning to face him fully, "for not asking too many questions." "I'll ask when you're ready to answer." She nodded, her eyes shining just a little in the porch light. For the first time, she looked like she might believe she had somewhere to be. And Isaac, who had spent 5 years living in silence, found himself grateful that his barn door had creaked open just enough to let someone in. The morning unfolded slow and warm, casting wide amber light across the kitchen floorboards as Isaac moved with the same quiet precision that had guided his hands for years. He was no stranger to change in weather or season, but change inside his house. That was something else entirely. It had been years since a woman moved through his kitchen, not just passing through, but moving like she belonged, like she was trying not to be seen but couldn't help but make the place feel alive again. May stood at the stove, her sleeves rolled up, gently stirring a pan of eggs with a wooden spoon that looked like it hadn't been used since before the cancer took Anna. She didn't hum, but she worked with that same focused rhythm Isaac recognized from people who weren't used to rest. Her eyes flicked often to the hallway, ears tuned to the smallest sound from her children. The kids were still asleep in the guest room. Well, not a guest room before, just a storage space with an old bed frame and sun-bleached curtains. But now, for the past 2 nights, it had the feel of permanence. Jessie had left a toy truck on the floor. Millie's drawing was tacked to the fridge with a rusty magnet. A chicken feather had somehow made its way to the countertop. Isaac didn't know how he felt about that. Or maybe he did. He just didn't have words for it yet. He watched May for a moment longer, then stepped outside, letting the screen door sigh shut behind him. The porch welcomed him with still air and the scent of warm soil. He sat on the top step, coffee in hand, boots tapping quietly against the wood. His gaze drifted to the barn, the field beyond, the horizon that stretched farther than anyone ever really traveled around here. When he went back inside, May had set plates on the table. She didn't make eye contact, just nodded toward the food. Isaac said thank you, because manners didn't cost anything, and they ate without speaking. It wasn't uncomfortable, not exactly, just new. Later that day, May asked if there was anything that needed doing. Isaac considered telling her she didn't have to earn her place here, but the words caught in his throat. He could tell she wouldn't hear them anyway, not yet. So instead, he handed her a pair of gloves and nodded toward the back lot where the fence had been giving him trouble. She took to the work with an intensity he recognized. Not joy, but purpose. Every nail hammered into wood seemed like her way of proving something, not to him, but to herself. The sun bore down, and sweat darkened the back of her dress, but she didn't slow. Isaac worked alongside her, neither of them talking much, both watching the kids from time to time as they played nearby. Jesse had discovered a long stick and declared it a sword. Millie collected smooth stones and lined them along the edge of the garden. Goldie followed them everywhere, surprisingly loyal, clucking in protest whenever Jesse swung his makeshift sword too close. As the day passed, small pieces of May's story began to show, not through explanation, but in behavior. She froze when a truck drove by too slowly on the road. She jumped at the crack of a dropped bucket. She checked the locks twice before bed. Isaac didn't comment. He noticed. He filed it away like a farmer watching the sky before a storm. One afternoon, he found May scrubbing out the old utility sink in the tool shed. No one had touched it in years. She didn't look up when he stepped inside. "You don't have to clean the whole place," he said gently. "I know," she replied, scrubbing harder. He didn't press. He just stood there, watching her back tighten with each movement. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, they sat on the porch again. The kids were inside, quiet and calm. May held a cup of tea with both hands, her knuckles pale from the grip. "This isn't permanent," she said suddenly, voice low. Isaac didn't look at her. He nodded slowly. "I'm just trying to find a way forward," she added. "You're here now. That's something." She didn't answer, but he noticed the way her shoulders eased just a little. The days began to fall into rhythm. Not quite routine, not yet, but something close. Mornings started with May cooking, the children tumbling into the kitchen with sleepy faces and wild hair. Jesse followed Isaac into the yard more often, trying to mimic his stride. Millie sat quietly during chores, handing tools with the kind of precision that showed how carefully she watched. May worked constantly, fixing a drawer that stuck, pulling weeds, organizing the cluttered shelves in the pantry. It was as if she didn't know what to do with stillness. Isaac let her. Not because he expected it, but because he knew that sometimes motion was the only way to keep from falling apart. In town, whispers started. Dusk Creek wasn't a place that welcomed change easily. Folks noticed a white woman and her 2 children on Isaac Banks' property. Questions hung in the air like humidity before a storm. At the feed store, Mr. Chambers looked too long at May. At the diner, a waitress asked Isaac if she was just passing through. Isaac didn't answer. He never had much patience for talk that didn't grow crops or fix engines. Still, he knew how these things went. People didn't need facts to build judgment. They just needed something new and different, and May was both. One day, when he and May went to town together for supplies, the stairs felt heavier. May kept the children close, one on each side. Jesse wandered toward a display of candy, and before May could stop him, the store clerk snapped, "You touch, you buy." The words weren't harsh, but the tone made Jesse flinch. May's hand flew to his shoulder, pulling him back protectively. Isaac watched the entire scene. He didn't say anything then, but later, back in the truck, as they bumped down the dirt road toward home, he saw the way May's jaw clenched, how she stared straight ahead without blinking. "You're not the problem," he said quietly. May didn't respond, but her fingers loosened around the door handle. That night, after the kids were asleep, Isaac found her out by the barn, sitting on a bucket, staring at nothing. He brought her a blanket, draped it over her shoulders without a word, and sat beside her. "I keep thinking I should go," she murmured, "before I make things worse for you." "You haven't made anything worse," Isaac replied. "They talk. They've always talked." Silence settled between them. Crickets sang in the distance. The wind stirred the trees. "Do you think I'm selfish?" she asked. "No. I didn't know where else to go. I just saw the barn and hoped." Isaac nodded. "Sometimes hope's all you get." She looked at him then, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, maybe. A quiet understanding that neither of them had chosen their paths, but both had found themselves at the same place in the dirt. The next morning, Isaac woke to find a small bouquet of wildflowers on the table. No note, just color against the dull wood. He smiled and went outside, where Jessie ran toward him with a stick in one hand and a lopsided grin. Millie peeked from behind the porch post, clutching a drawing. May stood at the edge of the garden, sleeves rolled, hair messy, face calm. Isaac didn't need to ask if she was staying today. He already knew. And even though he said nothing, he felt it, that subtle shift, like the first true rain after a drought. May wasn't a guest anymore, not in her eyes, not in the way she moved through the house, not in the way the children laughed without fear. Goldie clucked at his feet. He looked down and raised an eyebrow. "You let them stay, huh?" he muttered. The chicken pecked the ground and strutted off, tail high like she owned the place. Isaac chuckled under his breath, then turned back toward the porch. Behind him, the sound of tiny feet and lighter laughter followed, and in front of him, May waited, brush in hand, sleeves rolled, ready to fix whatever came next. The wind carried the scent of warm earth and dry grass as Isaac walked the edge of the southern field, testing the tension of the wire with his gloved fingers. It had held through the last storm, but it was aging, like most things on the farm. Nearby, Jessie ran barefoot along the worn path between rows of beans, shouting something unintelligible, a stick in one hand and dirt smeared across his face. Millie followed behind, arms full of mismatched wildflowers, her small hands carefully sorting them by color. Goldie, as usual, trailed behind like she was keeping inventory. From the porch, May called out for the children to wash up for lunch, her voice soft but firm, the kind that had learned to keep order without raising tone. The screen door creaked open, then slammed shut again. Isaac glanced toward the house and saw her move back inside, her hair tied up with a scrap of fabric, the hem of her dress damp from the garden hose. The image stayed with him, practical, composed, like she'd always belonged there. Inside the house, the table was already set when Isaac came in. The children were scrubbing their hands in the basin with exaggerated motions, Jessie splashing, Millie meticulous. May was pulling a skillet off the stove, and the smell of cornbread and beans filled the kitchen with a kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. They ate together in a silence broken only by the occasional clink of utensils or the childish murmur of conversation between the twins. Isaac listened more than he spoke, as always, but his gaze lingered longer on May now, not intrusive, just watchful. After lunch, while the kids napped on the swing beneath the porch awning, Isaac found May in the tool shed again. She was sorting through a pile of rusted nails and bolts, organizing them into jars that had long since lost their labels. "You're going to run out of things to fix," he said as he stepped into the doorway. She didn't turn around. "That's the idea." He nodded, leaning against the frame. You always keep busy like this?" "Only when I'm not allowed to sit." She said it so matter-of-factly, like it wasn't a confession but a truth carved deep into her. Isaac didn't respond. He knew when to let silence carry weight. That evening, as dusk settled and the air turned to velvet, May joined Isaac on the porch. She carried 2 cups of tea and handed him one before sitting beside him on the top step. The sky had begun to turn pale orange at the edges, and the cicadas were warming up for the night. The children were still out front, piling rocks and pretending to build castles. Goldie clucked lazily nearby. "I haven't told you everything," May said, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Isaac turned his head slightly but didn't speak. "I didn't just leave," she continued. "I ran." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "My husband, he was smart, calculated. People liked him. Doctors, lawyers, police officers. He knew all the right ones. But behind closed doors," she took a breath, then let it out slowly, "he had rules. Rules about where I went, what I wore, what I said. And when I stopped following the rules, when I started asking questions, he made sure I regretted it." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He just listened. "The bruises were the easy part," May said. "The hard part was what he did to my head. Made me think I was nothing, that I was crazy, that no one would believe me, that if I ever took the kids and left, I'd lose them." She looked away toward the fields. "He said he'd find me, said I wouldn't make it a week on my own, that I couldn't survive without him." Isaac looked down at his boots. "How long have you been gone?" 3 weeks, she answered. "No money, no car, just what I could carry and 2 scared kids who didn't know why Mama was crying." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "We slept in parks, behind churches, on the edge of towns where no one asked questions. Then we found your barn." Isaac took a long sip of tea. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "You did survive." May looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "You're still surviving, and they're still with you. They're all I've got." He nodded. "And you're all they've got. That counts for something." They sat there for a while longer, saying nothing, watching the sky shift from orange to purple. After the children were tucked in and Goldie roosted near the back door like a feathery sentry, Isaac slipped away into town the next morning. He didn't tell May where he was going. He just said he had errands to run. He drove into Dusk Creek, parking outside the old law office on Main Street. Inside, the place smelled of paper and lemon polish. He waited patiently while a receptionist shuffled files, then was ushered into the back where Janine Keller, a retired legal aide who owed him more than one favor, glanced up over her glasses. "You said it was urgent," she prompted. "It is," Isaac said. "I've got a woman and 2 kids living on my land. No papers, no money. They're running from someone dangerous. I need to know what we can do to protect them." Janine narrowed her eyes. "Are you involved?" "I'm helping, that's all." They talked for nearly an hour, about temporary custody filings, emergency protective orders, legal loopholes that might give May a chance to fight back. Janine gave him paperwork, a checklist, and an envelope full of contact numbers. Isaac left with the weight of responsibility heavier than it had been in years. Back at the ranch, May was in the garden with Millie, showing her how to pull weeds without damaging the roots. Jesse was chasing butterflies with a paper cup, shouting triumphantly every time he got close. Isaac watched them from the truck for a moment before getting out. May looked up as he approached, shading her eyes with one hand. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yeah," he said simply. Just needed to check on some things. That evening, they sat on the porch swing with the children asleep nearby. Goldie clucked softly from beneath the railing, and the stars blinked into existence overhead. Isaac handed May a cup of tea. She took it slowly, her hands still dirt-streaked from the garden. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Doing what?" "Helping. Letting us stay. Giving without asking." Isaac leaned back, his eyes on the sky. "Because someone did that for me once. When Anna passed, I wasn't fit for anything but hiding. A friend of my father's showed up every morning for a month. Didn't say much, just worked beside me. Never asked how I was doing, just stayed until I could stand again." He paused. "I never forgot what that felt like." May was quiet for a long time. "Do you ever miss her?" "Every day," he answered. "But missing her doesn't mean I have to stop living." May blinked. "I haven't figured out how to live again yet." "You're doing better than you think." A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees. Jesse stirred in his sleep. May glanced over, then back at Isaac. "Thank you," she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next day, Isaac found May in the shed again, this time repairing the broken hinge on the barn door. She held the screwdriver like she meant business, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth in concentration. He watched her for a moment before stepping closer. "Didn't know you were handy." "My dad was a mechanic," she said. "Taught me how to fix things before he taught me how to cook." "That explains why your biscuits are heavy." She turned and threw a washer at him. It bounced off his boot, but she was smiling, and that was enough. Later that week, he took her and the kids into town. They needed supplies, food, new boots for the children, thread for May's growing list of mending projects. At the hardware store, May disappeared down the aisles with the twins. When Isaac found them, Jessie was riding a display wheelbarrow and Millie had a half-melted lollipop sticking to her palm. May was crouched beside the paint samples, her eyes fixed on a card in her hand. "You thinking of painting the barn?" he asked. She startled, then shook her head. "Just looking." Her fingers rested on a pale blue swatch, the color of sky on a clear morning. "I used to paint," she said quietly. "A long time ago. Windows, doors, anything that made me feel like I still had a choice." Isaac didn't say anything, but something in his chest stirred. That night, as the house settled into sleep and the wind moved gently through the trees, May sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and a pad of paper. She drew slowly, thoughtfully. Her children, a field of grass, a sky without storm clouds. Outside, Isaac walked the perimeter of the property, checking gates, watching stars, listening for anything that didn't belong. And inside the house, for the first time in a long time, May felt like she wasn't running. Not tonight. Not here. Maybe nowhere was ever truly safe. But maybe this place came close. It was a morning like any other, sunlight pouring through the east window in wide strokes, the scent of fried eggs and coffee drifting through the house, and the soft creak of old wood beneath children's feet. Isaac sat at the table with Jessie on one side, happily demolishing a stack of pancakes, and Millie on the other, silently constructing a small pyramid of blueberries with careful precision. Across from him, May moved around the kitchen with natural rhythm, her motions fluid and practiced. Her smile was quiet, but it was real, and Isaac caught himself watching her more often than not these days. After breakfast, May gathered the plates, and Jessie offered to help with the dishwater. He mostly splashed it everywhere, but she thanked him all the same. Millie sat by the window, sketching something in a spiral notebook Isaac had brought home last week from town. Outside, Goldie scratched at the back steps with a single-minded purpose, pausing only to peck suspiciously at a passing beetle. The day unfolded easily. Isaac repaired a loose fence post near the west field while Jesse collected feathers and Millie helped May transplant some herbs near the kitchen window. By mid-afternoon, the sun had softened and the shadows stretched longer across the porch. Isaac found himself lingering near the house more than usual, as if something unseen had begun circling the edges of this fragile calm. He told himself it was nothing. Just habit, maybe. But that evening, while sitting on the porch with a cold glass of water in hand, watching the children chase each other barefoot through the dry grass, he couldn't shake the feeling that the quiet was too deep. It was the kind of stillness that came before a storm. May seemed to sense it too. She sat beside him, legs folded beneath her eyes scanning the far line where the fields met the dirt road. When she spoke, her voice was low. "You ever feel like something's watching you, even when there's nothing there?" Isaac didn't answer right away. He took another sip of water, then set the glass down. "Sometimes it ain't what's there that gets you," he said. "It's what might be coming back." May didn't speak after that. She just stared into the distance, her body tight with old tension, the kind that never truly left. The next day dawned clear and hot. Isaac was up before the sun, checking the chicken coop and hauling feed. By the time the children tumbled out of bed and into the kitchen, sleepy and wild-haired, he'd already stacked a quarter cord of wood and repaired a hinge on the garden gate. May was preparing breakfast when it happened. The sound was unmistakable. Gravel popping under tires, a low hum of a vehicle approaching slow and deliberate. Isaac froze mid-step on the porch. May stood perfectly still in the kitchen, spatula in hand, eyes wide. The children didn't notice, still chasing each other around the table, Goldie flapping indignantly nearby. Isaac moved to the screen door and stepped out onto the porch just as the vehicle came into view. It was a black SUV, sleek, polished, out of place in a town like Dusk Creek. It rolled to a stop at the edge of the driveway, and for a moment no one moved. The engine idled, a low, steady growl. Then the door opened. A man stepped out, tall, narrow-shouldered, wearing a tailored gray suit and mirrored sunglasses. He looked like he belonged in a courtroom, not a field. He took a slow look around, assessing the house, the barn, the yard with a clinical interest. His gaze passed over the swing, the tool shed, the porch, then landed on Isaac. "Good morning," the man said. His voice was smooth, practiced, and utterly void of warmth. "I'm looking for someone." Isaac didn't blink. He didn't move. Name of May Bennett. Traveling with 2 children, blonde, about this high. The man gestured loosely with his hand. "They may have passed through here." Isaac didn't answer. The man removed his glasses and tucked them into his pocket. "You sure you haven't seen her?" "I know who's on my land," Isaac said, his voice low and even. "If you're here without reason, you should leave." The man's mouth tightened just slightly at the corners. "I see. Well, if you do happen to run into her, tell her she can't run forever." He turned, walked back to the vehicle, and climbed in. The SUV reversed with perfect precision, spun on the gravel, and disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. When Isaac turned back toward the house, May was standing just inside the doorway. Her face was pale, her hands trembling against the frame. Jessie clutched the back of her leg, sensing something wrong. Millie stood behind her, silent. "Is that him?" Isaac asked, his voice soft now. May shook her head. "No, but he works for him." Isaac crossed the porch in 2 strides and laid a hand gently on her arm. "You're not alone now." That night, the house was quieter than usual. The children fell asleep on the living room floor, curled up together under one blanket. Goldie nested on the windowsill, occasionally ruffling her feathers like she was preparing for battle. Isaac brought more blankets and lit the old oil lamp in the corner, casting flickering shadows across the wood-paneled walls. May sat on the rug between the children, one hand resting on each of them. Isaac settled nearby, his back against the couch, his eyes scanning the windows even though he knew the man wasn't coming back that night. After a long stretch of silence, he asked, "Did you love him?" May didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "No," she said quietly. "I feared him." She looked up at Isaac, and for the first time her eyes were full of something more than fear. There was anger there, too, old, hard, and smoldering. And when I stopped fearing him, he got worse. Isaac's fists curled against the floor, but he didn't speak. "He always said no one would believe me," she continued, "that I was nothing without him, that if I ever ran, he'd find me and take the kids, and I'd be locked up or worse." "He was wrong," Isaac said. May blinked at the lamplight, her face drawn. "Why are you being so kind to us?" Isaac leaned his head back, exhaling slowly. "Because someone was kind to me when I needed it, and I never forgot what it felt like." The storm outside broke just after midnight. The rain came hard, hammering the roof like fists, wind moaning through the trees. The children stirred and whimpered. May pulled them close, whispering reassurances, her voice steady even though her own body trembled. Isaac stoked the fire in the stove, added another blanket, and sat beside them on the floor. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. His presence was enough. When the thunder faded and the rain softened into a lullaby, May finally leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. She was exhausted. He could feel it in every breath she took. "I'm scared," she murmured. "So was I when I first came here," he said quietly. "That's how I knew it was the right place." She didn't reply, but she didn't pull away either. Before dawn, while the sky was still dark and the storm had passed, May rose from the floor and tucked the children back into bed. Goldie followed her into the kitchen, scratching at the rug again like she was rearranging territory. May brewed coffee, humming softly, her voice barely audible but steady. Isaac came in just as she poured his cup. He raised an eyebrow. "You're humming," he said. She looked surprised, then smiled faintly. "I guess I am." Later that morning, she made biscuits and added cinnamon to the dough. Isaac bit into one and raised both brows. "You trying to poison me?" "Improving your life, actually." Goldie sneezed loudly from the windowsill. May rolled her eyes. "She disagrees." Isaac chuckled and reached for another. In the light of the new day, May moved through the kitchen like she owned it. Or perhaps like it finally belonged to her. Her hair curled gently around her face, damp from the storm, and her laughter was unguarded, warm. That afternoon, a shadow passed across the porch again. Not a man this time, but memory. The children played outside, kicking a ball in the soft mud. Isaac sat in the rocker, watching them, when May appeared beside him with a letter in her hand. "No stamp," she said. "It was tucked under the mat." Isaac took it from her, unfolded it carefully. Inside, scrawled in sharp black ink, were words that made the back of his neck tighten. "He knows where I am. He promises forgiveness if I return. He says I'm delusional, dangerous, that the children would be better off with him." Isaac folded the letter and set it on the table beside them. He stood and walked to the yard without a word. May watched him go, her throat tightening. When he returned, his face was drawn, lined with something more than worry. He looked tired. "I'll understand," he said softly, "if you need to run." May stared at him, then shook her head. "You think I want to run?" she said. "I'm always scared. But I'd rather face him here, with you, than run forever." Isaac stepped closer. "Then stay," he said. May's eyes filled with tears. "Even if the chicken snores?" He smiled, slow and sure. "Especially then." And that night, as the wind carried the last scent of rain away, the children slept soundly upstairs. Goldie stood watch near the door, and May, who had once been nothing more than a shadow in his barn, finally slept without fear. She didn't dream of running. She dreamed of staying. The morning sun rose slow and gentle over Dusk Creek, casting soft light across the porch where May stood barefoot, coffee cup in hand. The wooden boards beneath her feet still held the faint memory of last night's storm, but the sky above had already forgiven everything. The clouds were long gone, and the air was clean with that rare kind of silence that only follows thunder. Inside the house, the children were still sleeping, curled together in a heap of quilts and limbs. Goldie perched on the kitchen windowsill, feathers puffed, one foot tucked up like she had all the time in the world. Isaac came up the back steps with a bucket of eggs and a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't say anything, just passed May the coffee refill she hadn't asked for and set the bucket on the counter. She nodded in thanks, and for a while they stood side by side, just listening to the soft creak of the house as it woke with the day. They had fallen into something like a rhythm, not quite routine, but steady, dependable. May woke first most days, sometimes to the sound of Isaac moving through the fields, or to the whisper of Millie crawling into her bed. She made breakfast. He worked outside. The children played. May fixed what was broken or cleaned what had been ignored too long. It was quiet, but not lonely. There was movement in the quiet, healing maybe, not loud or dramatic, but steady like the growth of roots underground. Isaac never spoke about the letter again, and May didn't ask him to. It sat tucked in a drawer in the hallway, unread since that day, the paper folded perfectly in half like it was waiting to be burned or forgotten. But neither of them touched it. They simply moved on, one foot in front of the other. By midweek, May was humming more often than not, sometimes so softly that she didn't even realize it. The children had stopped asking when they would be leaving. Jesse followed Isaac everywhere, helping with tools too heavy for his small hands, and Millie had made a game of drawing everything she saw: the barn, the sky, Isaac's old boots, even Goldie, who never seemed satisfied with her portraits. The chicken had claimed the porch steps as her throne and stood watch like a feathered sentry, unimpressed by everything except breadcrumbs and sunshine. It was on a Thursday when Isaac drove into town alone. May didn't ask why. She watched him pull away in the truck, dust rising behind the tires, and felt a pang of something that surprised her. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the kind of anxiety born from knowing someone had become important. She busied herself around the house, scrubbing the floor, folding the same clothes twice, helping Millie glue together a cardboard box castle for Goldie, who promptly destroyed it. Isaac returned after lunch, quieter than usual. He handed May an envelope and waited. Inside was a business card, a lawyer's office, a name she didn't recognize. "I talked to someone," he said simply. "She can help with custody, protection, emergency orders, whatever you need." May stared at the card, her hand trembling slightly. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." The words sat between them for a long moment, heavy with meaning neither of them tried to untangle. Then, without warning, May stepped forward and threw her arms around him. It wasn't careful or hesitant. It was instinct, raw and real. Isaac stood still for a second, then wrapped his arms around her in return, holding her like something precious and fragile but stronger than it looked. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. She pulled back just enough to see his face, her eyes glassy with tears. "I know," she said. "I'll believe you." She kissed him then, softly, unsure at first, but real. It wasn't desperate or rushed. It was the kind of kiss that came after too much silence and too many walls. The kind of kiss that meant something had settled, that something was finally safe. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and Goldie had nested contentedly on the back steps, May did something she hadn't done in years. She painted. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, a brush in one hand and a can of pale blue paint at her feet. She hadn't planned it. She'd found the color sample in her pocket that afternoon, the one she had picked up at the hardware store weeks ago, and something in her had said now. She started with the back door. Stroke after stroke, the wood turned the color of sky at dawn, the color she'd always imagined when she thought of safety. Isaac stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. "Thought you didn't want to leave a mark," he said. She turned toward him, smiling with paint on her fingers and hope in her eyes. "I changed my mind." He stepped closer, his voice low. "This place saved you?" May shook her head, setting the brush down gently on the edge of the can. "No, Isaac, you saved me. But more than that, I saved myself. You just left the light on." She walked toward him and leaned into his chest. He wrapped his arms around her again, but this time there was no uncertainty, just warmth, just knowing. The days rolled forward like river water, steady, slow, clear. May began using her full name again. She signed the legal papers Isaac helped her file. She spoke with the lawyer on the phone, her voice shaken at first but steadying with every word. She didn't look over her shoulder as often. The go-bag she'd once kept hidden under the couch found a new place, empty in the back of the closet. The children thrived. Jessie learned to climb trees and dig trenches and properly chase chickens without getting pecked. Millie planted sunflowers along the fence line and learned to braid grass into crowns. They slept deeply, without nightmares, without needing to be held. And when they laughed, it was whole and loud and unbroken. Isaac built a shelf in the kitchen for May's paints. It was rough and crooked, but she smiled like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She painted the barn door next, soft blue with white trim. Jessie added a handprint in red. Millie followed in yellow. Isaac dipped a thumb in green and pressed it just above the latch. Even Goldie, despite herself, seemed to approve. And then, one morning, the mail came. Isaac walked up the drive with a small stack of envelopes, most of them bills or catalogs, but one stood out, thicker, official. May saw it in his hands before he even reached the porch. Her heart stuttered, then steadied. She opened it slowly. Inside was a court order. Emergency custody granted. A restraining notice issued. Legal recognition of what had already become truth in their home. She read it twice, then pressed it to her chest. "They can't take them," she whispered. "They're mine. They're safe." Isaac stood silently, hands in his pockets, eyes gentle. "Told you," he said. May looked up at him, eyes shining. "Thank you," she said. "You did this." He shook his head. "I just held the rope. You climbed." That Sunday, they all went to the county fair. Isaac packed up the truck with picnic blankets and peanut butter sandwiches. May dressed the children in clean clothes and brushed Millie's curls into neat ribbons. Even Goldie came along in a crate in the back, clucking her protest until Jessie fed her popcorn. People stared, of course. Small towns always did. But no one whispered judgment. Some smiled. Others nodded politely. One older woman handed May a pie and said, "For the little ones." Jessie dug into it with both hands before they even reached the booth. May laughed so hard she nearly cried. Isaac watched from a step behind, arms folded, heart wide open. That evening, they sat on the porch swing together, the children upstairs, fast asleep, Goldie snoring gently below them. May leaned into Isaac's side, her hand resting over his chest, feeling the steady beat of something she hadn't trusted in years. "You know," she said, "I never thought peace would look like this." "What did you picture?" "I don't know. A cabin, a lake, something quiet and alone." She looked around, the half-washed windows, the crooked swing, the muddy boots by the door. "This is messy, loud, it smells like feed bags, and it's perfect." Isaac chuckled softly. "That's what I aim for." She turned her face toward him, more serious now. "Do you ever wonder why we found each other?" "I used to," he admitted. "But I stopped needing a reason the moment I realized I didn't want you to leave." She smiled. "I won't." He kissed her then, slow, sure, not rushed, not uncertain. After everything, the fear, the silence, the storm, the letters, this kiss was home. Later that night, after tucking Jessie in and smoothing Millie's blankets, after checking the back door and turning out the lights, May swept the last crumbs from the kitchen floor while Isaac made tea. Goldie stood in the middle of the room like a tiny feathered overseer. "You think she approves?" Isaac asked, nodding at the chicken. May tilted her head thoughtfully. "She hasn't clucked in disapproval all day. That's a good sign." "She's practically family," he said. Goldie sneezed. May raised an eyebrow. "Think she's getting sentimental?" "Only if she starts laying heart-shaped eggs." They laughed, and when the house finally settled into stillness, they stepped outside into the warm night. The stars blinked above like old friends. Isaac took May's hand and held it gently, his thumb brushing the back of her knuckles. "You ever want more?" he asked. May thought for a long moment. "I want mornings like this one, afternoons fixing fences, kids falling asleep dirty from playing hard, and you, right here." He nodded. "That's more than enough." She rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to think love had to be loud. Fireworks, speeches, big moments. But now," she smiled into the dark, "now I think it sounds like a man saying, 'Stay if the chicken don't snore.'" Isaac grinned. "She hasn't yet." A quiet cluck rose from beneath the porch. They froze. May narrowed her eyes. "Was that a snore?" "Might have been a yawn." They both laughed, and under a sky full of stars, in a house filled with color and crumbs and second chances, the woman who had once run for her life finally stopped. Because she wasn't running anymore. She was home. Even if the chicken did snore. Morning came with the hush of early light, a pale gold stretching across the edge of the fields like a slow promise. May stood barefoot in the kitchen, the hem of her nightdress brushing against her ankles, a cup of warm tea resting in both hands. Outside the window, the dew still clung to the grass, catching light like tiny crystals. From upstairs came the faint sound of children's feet stirring, a door creaking, and Jessie's voice murmuring something sleepy and half-lucid. Goldie was already awake, perched on the back porch railing with her feathers fluffed against the cool air, keeping her vigil like she always did. The painted back door glowed faintly in the morning light, the sky blue now fully part of the house, not just a layer of paint, but a declaration of safety, of stillness, of chosen permanence. May watched the steam curl from her cup and listened as Isaac moved around somewhere outside, probably checking on the coop or walking the perimeter like he always did after a windy night. It had become his habit to walk the borders of the land before the world woke up, and hers to make the first cup of tea before the second wave of life burst through the walls. The children came down soon after, Jessie already muddy from the knees down, despite it still being early, and Millie holding a handful of clover blossoms with sleepy purpose. May kissed the tops of their heads and set out breakfast, and the three of them sat with the easy comfort of a family that had lived through something hard and come out quieter, stronger. The fear didn't disappear, but it no longer ruled them. When Isaac came in, the sun was already over the trees. He leaned his shoulder against the doorframe and watched the table for a moment before joining them. His boots left a faint trail of dust across the floor, and his face was streaked with the kind of sweat that came from work, not stress. May poured him coffee, and he accepted it without a word, their glances carrying more meaning than speech ever could. Later that day, he helped Millie string up the first of the laundry lines near the side shed, and she took to it like a general, assigning Jessie the role of clothespin assistant. May sat nearby, mending a shirt with tiny stitches, her fingers moving in rhythm with the rise and fall of her breath. There was a peace in these small tasks, a sense of belonging that didn't require permission or formality. Isaac found himself watching her more and more, not out of curiosity but recognition. She had become part of the land, part of the day, part of him. But he also noticed the subtle things that hadn't changed, the way she still checked the locks before bed, even though the court order had come through, the way she sometimes flinched when a door slammed too hard or when a stranger's voice rang too sharply in town. The go-bag was gone, yes, but some of her was still packed inside it, folded tightly and tucked out of reach. Isaac didn't push. He just stayed close, built shelves where she needed storage, sharpened tools she hadn't touched yet, left space for her to fill when she was ready. That afternoon, while the kids played beneath the old elm near the chicken coop, May stepped into the barn to brush down one of the horses. It had become part of her new rhythm, something quiet that let her breathe. She hummed under her breath as she worked, her strokes even, her touch light. The barn smelled of dust and hay and oil, and the sun angled through the rafters in wide stripes of gold. Isaac found her there, sleeves rolled, hair pulled up loosely, a smear of dust across her cheekbone. He leaned against the wall and watched for a moment before speaking. "You were meant for this," he said. May looked up, caught off guard. "What? This place?" He nodded slowly. "These kids, this barn. Even the grumpy chicken likes you." Goldie clucked indignantly from the door, as if on cue. May laughed, shaking her head. "I wasn't meant for anything, Isaac. I was thrown into it." "You landed well." She blinked. Her eyes shone in the late light. "Only because you didn't throw me out." That night, a summer storm rolled in slowly, grumbling on the edges of the horizon. Isaac checked the windows again, even though he had already latched them. May paced the living room, restless in the kind of way he had come to understand was less about weather and more about what weather reminded her of. The children were unsettled. Jessie stirred and whimpered in his sleep, and Millie called out once in a dream. May sat between their beds, one hand on each of them, her body stiff with alertness. Isaac brought an extra blanket and lit the old oil lamp on the shelf, its warm glow dancing shadows across the floor. He sat beside her on the carpet, legs stretched out, back against the wall. They stayed like that a long while, not speaking, watching the storm roll in through the cracks of the window glass and the rise and fall of the children's breathing. Finally, he asked, "Do you think he's still looking for you?" May's voice was quiet. "Maybe, maybe not, but I don't think that matters anymore." Isaac glanced at her. "Why not?" She looked at him then, her eyes tired but clear. "Because this is the first time I've had something worth staying for. And if he shows up, I won't run. I'm done running." He nodded slowly. "I loved her, you know," he said, and it took her a moment to realize he meant Anna. It was different, quieter, slower, but real. Losing her, I thought that was it. Thought I'd be hollow for the rest of my life. May didn't interrupt. She waited. "Then you showed up," Isaac continued, "with 2 kids and a chicken and more silence than I knew how to fill. And suddenly, the house wasn't empty anymore. It had noise again. It had breath." He turned toward her. "You gave me something I didn't think I'd ever get again." May reached out and touched his hand, her fingers warm and steady. "I didn't mean to stir things up," she said. He gave a small, lopsided smile. "I needed it." The next day, they took the kids fishing. Isaac packed a small cooler and May packed peanut butter sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Jessie caught nothing but a bent stick, and Millie fell asleep on May's lap halfway through. Isaac skipped stones across the water, showing May how to hold her wrist, how to flick just right. She was terrible at it, and they laughed until their stomachs hurt. "Maybe I wasn't meant to catch things," May said. "Only mend them." "There's beauty in both," Isaac replied. When they walked home through the long grass, Goldie followed behind with exaggerated pride, as if she had personally led them to the pond and back. And for the first time in a long while, May realized she hadn't looked over her shoulder once. It happened 2 mornings later. The letter. It came without warning, just like the last. No stamp, no return address. Tucked beneath the porch mat as if slipped there by wind or shadow. May saw it first, her fingers hesitating before picking it up. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was from him. It was all there in his handwriting, smooth, confident, familiar, and poisonous. He knew where she was. He promised forgiveness if she came back. He painted himself as the victim, called her delusional, claimed the children were unsafe with her, that he would take them and raise them properly, that she had no legal ground, that she was still nothing. She read it through once, then again. Then she took it to Isaac, hands clenched tight. He read it in silence, jaw tight, eyes cold. When he finished, he folded the paper and stepped outside without a word. May didn't follow. He didn't come back for nearly an hour. When he did, his face was different, harder. "I'll understand," he said quietly, "if you need to run." May stared at him, tears welling but not falling. "You think I want to run?" "I think you're scared." "I'm always scared," she said, "but I'd rather face him here with you than live a life where I'm always hiding. If I run now, I'm telling him he still controls me, and I won't do that." Isaac stepped closer. "Then stay." Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Even if the chicken snores?" His smile broke through the tension like sunlight after a long rain. Especially then. The next morning, Isaac drove into town again. When he returned, he handed her another envelope. Inside was a business card, but this one wasn't just a contact, it was a confirmation. A meeting had been scheduled, paperwork had been prepared. May would be filing for permanent custody and legal protection, not just temporary orders. It would take time, maybe months, but it would be official. It would be real. May looked at him, heart in her throat. "You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, he said again. And that night, as the wind moved gently through the trees and the sky turned deep indigo above them, May painted again. Not the house, not the doors. This time, it was a canvas. An old one Isaac found in the shed, still usable after all these years. She painted wild fields and small feet and chickens that watched too closely. She painted blue doors and soft yellow light and a porch swing under stars. And she painted a man. Not large or loud or heroic, but steady. The kind of man who left the light on. Behind her, Isaac watched her work, arms folded, heart full. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to, because everything she had once feared, everything she had once run from, now lived in the background. And what lived in front of her was new, solid, growing. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to keep the journey going, and don't forget